Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this chat on energy in New Hampshire. A conversation on energy can be very convoluted and rather difficult to follow. Sometimes it can become very technical. But what Lee and I are going to try to do today is to have a conversation that is accessible to everyone and that allows everyone to feel comfortable asking questions about their own issues or their own interests in relation to energy in New Hampshire and their own suggestions as well. I'm going to be joined by Representative Lee Oxenham. She is now a member of the New Hampshire House and she serves on the Science, Technology and Energy Committee. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you, Beatriz. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. As Beatriz has told you, I'm a state rep. I'll be running for my 4th term in October. And I have been on Science, Technology, and Energy for 2 terms. My very first term, I was on the Resources Committee. I've been a committed environmentalist my entire life. I date that back to going to the Sierra Nevadas with my parents when I was a child and recognizing that we lived on a fragile planet and we had to work very hard to ensure that the resources and the creatures that share this planet with us are able to survive the manifold ways in which we impact them every day. So I started with resources, moved to science, technology, and energy. And there I have been working very hard on climate-related issues, particularly energy storage, but also issues having to do with making it possible for people to invest in renewable energy. So, and that's where Beatriz and I have a lot of commonality. So delighted to think that she could be working with me this fall and over the next 2 years, because we really haven't had a partnership with the Senate. And to have someone with your experience on STE coming in right from the get-go with such expertise is going to be terrific.
Well, it would be terrific for me because even though my background is different from yours, I really worked very hard while I was in the House, and I picked that committee for the same reasons that you picked it, because I felt that that was the place from where we could have the greatest impact on state policies that would really clean up the energy landscape in New Hampshire. And talking about the energy landscape, I don't know how much things have changed, but when I was there, I remember that anytime you were dealing with energy, you had to deal with at least 4 major sets of issues. You had to deal with issues of energy usage, efficiency and waste. You had to deal with issues of energy costs. How much did the ratepayers pay, and what did they pay it for? That's the other interesting issue. We had to deal with issues of emissions and environmental impact. And we had, of course, to deal with energy sources and fossil fuels as opposed to renewables. And thinking about that last issue that I have mentioned, just very recently there was an LP from you in the Valley News, and it had to do with a major decision by Liberty Utilities, the decision to cancel the Granite State Bridge. And I would like you to talk about that, because that is, in talking about energy, I think that it'd be best if, instead of going from the very high altitude technical conversation to the lay level, we start from the ground up. And starting from the ground up, I think that bridge is a good way to start. What do you think?
Yes, indeed. The Upper Valley area has had its own issues about pipelines. And as you're well aware, Liberty had previously suggested having natural gas brought in by trucks and then piping it through a local distribution line. Local activists, and I count myself among them, worked hard to beat back that project, and that project was abandoned. We were able to get a particular restriction in at the PUC that said they had to have customers on the line signed up before they got the go-ahead. They didn't get those customers, and the project died. So Granite Bridge fell right after that one, and it seemed to be, Liberty switched. Okay, not going to be able to get it into there. Let's find a way to get natural gas in somewhere else in New Hampshire. Well, that also was going to be putting us into a situation where we're going to be increasing our reliance on natural gas. This at a time when every forward-thinking economist and civil engineer and electrical engineer is telling us we need to decarbonize. We need to get away from fossil fuels. But here was Liberty once again saying, let's build another pipeline. Let's bring in more natural gas. So the result, to cut to the chase, with them abandoning the project is they're still going to be bringing in natural gas, but they're going to do it through an existing pipeline. And this means they're going to be using existing resources, existing infrastructure more efficiently, which is the number one way that we drive down costs, the number one way that we improve energy efficiency. The energy usage is by energy efficiency, which of course takes us back to you and PACE, which I'm sure we're going to get to, because this is the key. If we use our energy efficiently, we use so much less of it. If we use LEDs, it's 12 times as efficient as using incandescents. That's an enormous savings. We don't have to generate that electricity. We don't have to have transmission lines for it. The cheapest, best, most efficient way is to use less, and you do that by using things more efficiently. And that's what Liberty is going to do. They're not going to build a new pipeline. They're not going to build a new storage unit. They're going to use an existing pipeline more efficiently.
You see, that's really important because what they're going to do now is exactly the opposite of what they were going to do before. I mean, they're still going to be bringing in the natural gas, but it's really a major philosophical distinction between saying, you know what, we're going to continue to build more, to produce more and more energy so that people can consume more and more. And the other position is to say, you know what, we have to cut down on consumption. We have to cut down on waste. And by doing that, we are doing more for the environment and more to lower costs than by doing almost anything else. So in this sense, the change from the new pipes to the old pipes is certainly a saving, but it's also a way to stop waste. And a lot of the cost of the energy that we pay is associated with waste. And I think that's why don't you think so?
It's huge. Yeah, absolutely. It's something like 30% or 33% of the electricity that's actually generated somewhere, poisoning the atmosphere, poisoning the land, actually gets to a meter, actually gets to a home or a business or a government facility where it can be used. The rest is simply lost along the way. Every sector of our electricity system and our energy system, there's enormous waste. And if we can capture those resources, it means we are burning less, we're combusting less, there's less carbon going into the atmosphere, and we're saving money. We're building local jobs, again, by not building a new pipeline, which has a 40 or 60-year lifetime, which locks us into using fossil fuels. We open up opportunities to be moving to what we need to be moving to, which is renewable energy. Oh, thank you very much for that, Beatriz. This graphic is nicely encapsulates what we could actually do. This was produced by Mark Jacobson at Stanford University. And it says, we can move by 2050 in New Hampshire to a completely wind, water, and solar energy production system. And this is one way that we could do it. You could do it other ways, but he's run the numbers. 15 different research teams at different universities have come up with different ways of doing it, but they all say we can meet all of our energy needs with renewables. And it may be a little small on your screen, but basically that was showing. Maybe we could get it back.
We will get it back anyway.
Okay, there it is. Basically, it's saying 30% solar, 20% offshore wind, and 40% onshore wind, all technologies that already exist. We're not thinking about anything that's, may be created, a new technological innovation that's suddenly going to arise in the 2040s. These are existing proven technologies. We can do this. We know we can do it. On the other side, you see some smaller numbers that are in there. They're not putting in anything from geothermal. We could certainly use geothermal resources in New Hampshire. They're putting in very little untitled turbines. So the major ones, as I suggested, were solar, wind, and hydro.
That's right. And the other, I think we're done with the slide, but the other important thing that the slide shows, the slide that you have, is the extent to which that green revolution, if you want, or green transformation is tied to the creation of new jobs. Because there is a lot of misconception about the effect that transitioning to renewable energy would have on the job market. And the truth is that even if you start at the local level, and we can talk about that when we talk about pace, you can easily see that transition creates a lot of new jobs. And they're good jobs. The jobs that the people who mine coal in West Virginia have, they're not good jobs. And right? And
right.
These would be
my grandfather was a coal miner in Kentucky. I can tell you, those are not good jobs.
There you have it. There you have it. So there is that added dimension to to this project to transition from the fossil fuel based energy to the renewable green energy. But it's interesting. I think that I like the way you related that bridge to the issue of waste, because people think about energy saving in terms of their own home and of their own behavior. And certainly that's extremely important. I mean, it's important to go to the LED light bulbs. It's important to turn off the lights when you can. It's important to not have 25 electronic devices running. All that is important and it saves energy. But they also have to realize what you pointed out, the extent to which a major amount of energy is lost through the mismanagement of energy policy, by bringing that energy from far, far away plants through long transmission lines that, first of all, lose a lot of energy and then cost a lot of money. I mean, New Hampshire has a transmission cost problem, and it doesn't come from me not turning off the light bulb. It comes from the power companies bringing the power to us. And that is another issue that is addressed when you switch to a different model of energy production. I think it's very important. And I mean, there is.
Before we lose the point you were making about jobs, I think it's well worth mentioning, New Hampshire doesn't have any fossil fuels. So when we're reliant on fossil fuels, our energy dollars are going out of state and often out of the nation, and they are fueling other people's economies. When we work with renewable energy, those are resources that are here in New Hampshire. That means local jobs. It's jobs in construction, it's jobs in maintenance, it's jobs that are in the design of a solar field. It's incomparably different than the jobs in the coal fields, which have been dwindling for years. And they're necessarily dwindling, and it's a good thing they're dwindling, because that's not an operation that is going to help us with the climate crisis. We need to be putting all of our efforts into making our investments towards a decarbonized future.
I mean, I completely agree, and I agree, and I think that, again, something that needs to be pointed out is that moving in that direction does not imply loss of jobs or an increase in costs. Because the fact is that costs would go down, noticeably, and jobs would increase, and the quality of the jobs would be better. It's all tied together. It's not thinking about climate action as something that you dream of because you want a cleaner planet. But of course, you can afford to dream of a cleaner planet because you sit in your office and you teach literature like me, and therefore you're not impacted by a lot of things. No, that's not the way it works. It's actually all tied together. New jobs, better quality jobs, lower costs for the ratepayers, and clean air and renewable sources. It's all part of the same puzzle, and we can solve all the pieces together, I think, if we work on them. And of course, the issue of emissions is important, because when one of the ways in which they sold us the natural gas thing was by saying, but it's much cleaner. It's much cleaner than burning grade 6 oil, which it is. But then there is another picture behind the whole gas, and I think that's what we need to talk about.
Are you talking about methane leakage in particular? Because it's everywhere, from the fracking fields through the pipelines to putting it into storage tanks, taking it out of storage tanks. All of these things are releasing a very, very potent greenhouse gas, such that natural gas is not better than coal. And numerous studies have shown that it's actually as detrimental, if not more detrimental, than coal to the atmosphere. So that, we're not solving any problems by our over-reliance on natural gas. We're just magnifying the problems and we're just digging the hole deeper.
That's right. And making a long-term investment that, is tying us to that approach for years to come, unless we stop it right now. Now, I think this is a good start in terms of the number of problems that we're dealing with. What can we do about them? That's one of the things that one has to wonder, in terms of, what do we have in our toolbox to deal with, a necessary increase of renewable energy, for instance, a fund to support energy efficiency programs. What tools do we have right now? I mean, how does the RPS work, the Renewable Standard Portfolio Standard, work in New Hampshire? You've been working with it more recently than I have. Do you want to talk about the RPS? Because it's a very important issue, the RPS, and also the ACP.
Unfortunately, you're giving me nightmares, because what you and I believe in is that policy can make a difference. Good policy backed by appropriate rules and regulations, and working with the private sector, we can advance these goals, and it's been done successfully in many states. But here in New Hampshire, it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. We got the Renewable Portfolio Standard, more than 10 years ago. It was saying we want 25% renewable energy in our energy generation mix by 2025. We are actually on that schedule. We're now right about 20%. It fluctuates month to month, but we have about 20% renewable energy in the New Hampshire energy portfolio. But when we tried to look beyond 2025, and we know from the IPCC that we have to be taking really important steps in the near future. 8 to 10 years is the limit to whether we can flatten the curve of this coming crisis. We're left without the tool because our governor has vetoed the legislation to move beyond the 2025 goal. As it is now, the goal evaporates. Oh, great. We got this far.
We're done.
We have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which we call RGGI. And that is where the money for energy efficiency comes in, that along with the systems benefits charge. And also something very interesting in the New England area, which is our ISO New England has opened the forward capacity market, which is part of the very difficult and convoluted electricity pricing system. They've opened that up to energy efficiency. And that's really a really good step that happened very recently. And so we are able to sell the energy not being produced because we've saved it by taking energy saving measures and get a monetized value back from that. And that helps us with funding energy efficiency. So we have 3 sources of funding there. But what happens? When you were in the House, RGGI was approved. We entered the regional compact with 9 other states. Now other states are coming in, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, all sorts of states are lining up to join. But unlike every other state in the compact, New Hampshire gives the money away. The point of RGGI was to put a cap on our greenhouse gas emissions, which it did, not a terribly aggressive cap, but it's a cap, and then sell the permits, as it were, the permits to pollute, and then use that money to make the energy efficiency investments that can get us to a better future. Well, what did our, after you left and we didn't have you there to fight for us, they gave all the money away. So whereas every other New England state has a trajectory where they're using less and less proportion, we're going up. And because our regional costs are predicated on our share of the total usage, New Hampshire is going to be paying more and more and more, as all the other states are paying less and less and less, because we didn't invest. We didn't take the money and put it to good use. We rebated it at, a cup of coffee on your monthly bill, which no one even notices.
I know, but that was such an ongoing battle. First of all, the Reggie discussion itself was a seasonal battle. Almost every time you started a new season, there would be a bill to repeal Reggie. And then you would have to make the same argument, we need to keep Reggie because, we're going to pay for it anyway. The only difference is that we can pay for it and get the benefits, or pay for it and not get the benefits because it's a regional initiative. Well, even that argument did not do the trick. But the problem was the way they used that money, just as you pointed out. And the same thing happens with the RPS. I mean, those are really good tools. The Reggie initiative is a fantastic tool, so is the RPS. But if you have a governor who is systematically blocking any possibility of expanding the class 2 energy requirement in the renewable portfolio, you're going to have a problem. I mean, it is true that we've reached a goal, but it's also true that if you compare our renewable portfolio standards with those of, Vermont, any other state in New England, they have very nice curves that go up and up and up in different colors. I have a graph.
They're very pretty.
I didn't want to overload you with graphs, but there's a very nice graph, and I actually got the graph from a Clean Energy New Hampshire presentation that I saw a little way back, and it was excellent. And then you see all those beautiful curves in different colors going up, and then you see New Hampshire in a kind of brownish color, just flat on the ground.
Flat line, no heartbeat. Dead.
So I think that it also that gives you a clear idea of the kind of work that you can do from the legislature, because it is from the legislature that you can come up with, RPS and RPS rules. And it's from the legislature that you can come up with Reggie rules. And then, of course, you need someone who's not going to veto everything you do.
Yeah, I'm sitting here. Yes, we have a governor who vetoed 57 bills last year. And this year, he won't have that opportunity because so few bills actually made it all the way through to where they could be, his veto pen could be applied. But he hasn't seen a renewable energy bill that he's liked. I have to rush in and say he did sign my energy storage bill this year.
That's something.
And so that was one. So he did find one that he could. But net metering is another one that's right up there with Reggie and the RPS. And what's happened there? We're trying to move from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatt, vetoed. Trying to move from 100 kilowatts to 125. We had a stronger one, but the Senate cut it back to 125. Even that, a tiny change.
He wouldn't do it.
He vetoed it.
He wouldn't do it.
So it's not only that the legislature can make policy. We have to have someone in the governor's office that will work with us.
That's right. We were talking about costs, and since you went into the topic of net metering, I'd like you to talk a little more about the concept of net metering so that everybody who's listening to us understands how it works, because we have net metering and we also have group net metering, and then we have, community aggregations. So we have, and again, we're talking about tools. We're talking about tools that we can use and that we already have in the toolbox to lower costs, increase renewables, protect the environment, do climate action. We do have a lot of tools. Just can you talk a little bit about the net metering and the group net metering? because it's a
Okay, I don't want to spend all the time because you've got so many other interesting things you want to talk about here. But net metering basically says that if you are producing energy at your residence or at your business and you have extra that you're not using, why waste it? Put it back out on the grid and you will be compensated for that with a credit. Now, if so, let's say I invest in solar PV, when I have excess energy, it doesn't travel interstate. It doesn't go far. It probably gets about as far on the wires as my neighbor or maybe two neighbors down the street. But that energy is going to be paid for 100% by the customer who's using it. So the utility is getting 100% of the value of something that was produced by my investment. That doesn't seem like a fair way to deal with things. So the incentive of net metering is if you're putting it out and somebody else is paying for it, then you're compensated at that level. Now, utilities have fought back against this. They don't like that we're using we are using their wires. So there's a certain amount of validity to their argument, but very little. And so across the country, net metering has been pared back and pared back and pared back. And we're now in a sort of a 2.0 here in New Hampshire, where instead of getting 100%, we're getting for transmission and for generation, we still get 100%, but for the distribution, we only get 20%. Okay, so that's local net metering, personal net metering. Group net metering allows people who don't have a backyard or they don't have a rooftop to join together and get the benefits of producing their energy through renewables, improving the world, and getting that payback of the excess generation that they put out onto the grid. So low-income people who live in multifamily homes, or people who of any income level who live in apartment buildings, by group net metering can find a way to be participants in the renewable energy revolution, and they can be monetarily credited with for having made that investment. And was the third one community power aggregation?
That's a more complicated one.
Yeah, that's a much more complicated one. I thought you had a third one, but
that was the one. But I mean, we don't need to get into that because the ones that I really wanted to bring up to the fore as tools that anybody can use were net metering and group net metering. Because I think that one of the most important things that we have to do from the legislature and from wherever we have a chance to speak is to help people realize how much they can already take advantage of and how to increase that toolbox that will allow us to cut our energy costs, increase the amount of renewables, clean up the planet, and all those things that I think go together in addition to creating new jobs. And I think that's something that we really can accomplish and that we already have a fair number of tools to do it. We need more, and especially we need to be able to use them, which is what is not happening right now because we have those tools and because of a series of vetoes and a lack of commitment from the government, the state government, we are not able to use them in the best way. So in talking about energy, and that was my last topic today. Talking about energy efficiency.
No, I think the whole topic today is energy.
No, energy efficiency. We've already talked about the issue of waste and about how the energy efficiency picture goes beyond your own light bulb and so on. But one of the things that I found was really important when I started working on this at the house was this notion that in order to make your house energy efficiency, you have to do a retrofit. And that retrofit is expensive. And, normally when you need to change your granite countertops, which is the example I always got from the banks, what do? You go to the bank and you get a loan. But we didn't want that to be the case because we wanted to be able to create a mechanism with pace that would allow people to retrofit their house without doing two things. The first one is coming up with the money up front by asking the bank for a loan that they had to pay as a loan. And then the second one is not having to pay off that loan if they decided to sell the house. And those were the two things that PACE did, because PACE, which stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy, was a program that, and it's still in statute. So, and except that right now it's just for commercial, not for residential, because we lost that battle to the Republicans. We kept the commercial.
We didn't have you as a fighter.
We lost the residential. Anyway, that's what it does, because what happens is that, you know, you get an inspection that decides what is the best way to deal with your energy efficiency project, and then the municipality loans you the money, and then you pay it back as an added on amount to your yearly taxes. But it's the whole individual project is conceived in such a way that the amount that you add to your taxes is offset by the amount that you save in energy costs through the year. And the other advantage it has is that if you had a bank from the loan, you would have to pay off that loan if you wanted to sell your house. But with that, it doesn't happen, because the loan stays with the house. So it allows it, and it's an added value to the house. So that was the way the program worked, and it was, and it still is, a very good tool to encourage people to do those energy retrofits for their homes. And the benefit of the energy retrofit is that, first of all, you spend less money in energy, and second, you use less energy. And when you use less energy, you're always doing something for the environment, which is one of the goals that we never lose sight of.
This has been the single largest obstacle to changing people's energy usage, is the upfront cost at the beginning. It's just insurmountable for most people. So by bringing forward this PACE design, as you did, you provided a mechanism that made it possible for people to say, okay, I'm going to put in this, whatever it is, this energy efficiency feature, and I'm going to be able to pay for it over time in increments, and I'm going to be able to benefit from it while I'm using it, so that you're actually paying less, which, again, if you have an electric vehicle, you pay less over your lifetime than if you have an internal combustion car. But that initial cost is a barrier. So time and time again, it's this initial upfront investment that gets in the way. So, something we can work on when you get to the Senate is amortization, on bill payments, so that people, while they're paying their monthly utility bill, are actually reducing the bill and getting the benefits of clean energy. There are mechanisms. PACE was really revolutionary. And of course, the Republicans managed to cut it back to only being available to commercial after you left, so that the residential customer no longer had that ability to access that. But again, I tried I was a co-sponsor on a PACE reformation bill this past spring that I think I don't even think it got out of the House, much less to the Senate. But together, we could get that back and remove that obstacle so that it's available to residential customers. Again, helping people overcome that initial block so that they can access those savings at the same time as they're decreasing overall energy use, which pays off for everyone. Everybody benefits when we reduce our energy, because that brings down the charges from the grid.
Yeah, it brings down the charges that appear under mysterious categories in your electricity bill every month, and that have nothing to do with the power that you're actually using. But the other thing, the last point I wanted to make with PACE is the fact that this is another example of how those programs turn into local jobs, because all the jobs that come into enacting PACE legislation are local jobs. The people who do the inspections are local.
Local contractors, local inspectors, local electricians.
Local hardwares, everything is local. So again, it goes back to the economy instead of going out of the economy, which is what you were pointing out earlier. Well, I think that we've had a very good chat, and maybe we can give someone else the opportunity to ask questions, unless you want to add something else.
I'm sure something will occur to me, but I'd love to get to the questions. And so when I also was a teacher at one time, and always found that it was much more interesting when students asked a question than when I just stood up there and lectured.
But maybe before we go into the questions, maybe we could have a look at those two last slides that we haven't looked at, because one of them had a comparison between two energy models, and the other one had some information about two important issues actually.
About health,
Land use and cost. Yes.
Yeah.
We look at the two slides before we let everybody else, participate in the conversation.
Hold those questions, and we promise to be done in 2 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, this one. You have your fossil fuel infrastructure on the left-hand side of the screen with the current demand, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you have your solar, wind, and water. And the point that is being made here is that simply by changing the source from which you're deriving the energy, we can drive down overall energy demand by 44%. That's almost cut it in half, simply by using much more efficient resources. Burning fossil fuels to create thermal energy to then turn it into electrical energy, you're losing efficiency at every step of the process. Not so with wind, water, and solar. They are much more efficient inherently. Solar, I think, is often clocked in at 90% efficient. You lose very, very little. So even by using the exact same amount of energy in our daily lives and our businesses, we can cut our energy usage in half simply by making that move. And again, what's the obstacle? We have to invest in new resources. That's okay, and then that last slide. This one, the health cost savings, everybody has COVID in mind. We're all concerned about what's happening to our hospitals and our healthcare system. By switching away from fossil fuels, by stopping that constant detrimental impact of breathing in volatile organic compounds and mercury and toxics, we can save lives. Here in New Hampshire, we could save 171 lives each year simply by using different energy sources. We can save our healthcare system $1.56 billion. These figures come from the Stanford study. And just as a final comment before we turn to those questions on land usage, so often now we hear from the fossil fuel lobby that, oh, you'd have to pave over the state of New Hampshire to have enough room for all the solar you'd need to generate an equivalent amount of energy. Not so. For that, to get to that 100% by 2050, we would be using well under 0.25% in terms of the total footprint. And even when you take into account the larger spacing area, 2.5%. So yeah, let's go to those questions.
That's right. We're done with the misconceptions. Now we can listen to the questions. Yes.
All right. Well, the first question comes from our Facebook audience. And the question is, now that we're all spending more time at home and energy costs are going up for all of us under COVID, how can we as New Hampshire be ready for the next crisis?
Do you want me to jump in, Beatrice, or do you want to go first?
No, you can.
Okay. First of all, I'd say preparing for the next crisis means creating a more resilient, more reliable, more sustainable energy production system, not one that relies on long distance transmission, not one that relies on bringing in fossil fuels that can get, you can have disruptions in supply. The more you have locally based distributed generation of electricity, the more you can have microgrids so that you can cut off a local area, make sure your fire department, your police department, your local store, your school, you have everything you need to survive an emergency crisis. Now, a long-term crisis like COVID is changing a lot of our behaviors. So we're using more electricity at home, less electricity at work. We're using a lot less gasoline because people aren't traveling. So there's been an enormous improvement in our air quality. there's been enormous improvement in so many ways. How we measure the not running the office building where we used to go into work, not running the heat and all the lights and HVAC and all the things that go into that building usage, and you compare that with home, I'm not sure that there is an increase, and if there is, I don't think it's really all that substantial.
You know, I completely agree with you, and I think that something that it's important to realize is that, you know, COVID-19 is a major crisis, but that it's a crisis that happens on top of a number of issues that have not received enough attention until now. When you said the way to deal with it is by making, you know, our energy productions, our reliance on specific sources more resilient, so that it can withstand, you know, whatever crisis comes. I think that's an important statement, because it goes beyond the crisis of the moment, and it just says we need to continue to build in that direction, because whether we have a crisis or not, we have to be moving in that direction. And if we do move in that direction, we'll be much better prepared to face any crisis, not just the COVID-19, but any crisis that can come after that. And I mean, the same thing that applies to energy at this point applies to something like broadband. It's the same thing. You know, all of a sudden, everybody's talking about broadband. Why? Because now everybody needs broadband. But broadband was already a major tool, and it was necessary for economic growth 10 years ago. So we
couldn't get the investment. No one would make the investment. So
don't get me started.
This is a silver lining with the CARES funding. We're actually getting broadband into Danbury. We're getting broadband into Springfield. There are towns across the state that are getting major investments. But, you know, we have to recognize we have to invest in order to grow our economy, in order to have the jobs we need, in order to have the key demographic, young people to move to the state. And all those things come with renewable energy. They don't come with business as usual reliance on burning fossil fuels.
No, they do not. And that's one of, I mean, if there is one silver lining to this crisis, is that it has exposed those weaknesses to the point that a lot of people who were not that aware of those issues as issues or as urgent issues are now beginning to realize the extent to which they are. So I'm hoping that in this sense, it's opening a window of opportunity for more, you know, dynamic action in relation to many of the issues we have been discussing here today and many other issues.
And the coming together of our communities. I think, you know, we've never been so aware of what it means to be an essential worker. Our grocery store clerks are essential workers. The people that are keeping the hospitals clean as our loved ones are going into the hospitals, those are essential workers putting their lives on the line. The notion that we suddenly had to get a $600 increase in the minimum wage, we needed that all along. You know, the minimum wage is so appallingly inadequate.
That's a perfect example.
You know, so I think that there's so many issues that all dovetail: jobs, healthcare, family leave. All of these things come together, and I think we've had a recognition that we're all in this together, and we've taken advantage and taken for granted people who have been essential to our lives without ever giving them any recognition, much less adequate payment.
That is exactly right. That is, and again, you know, that is what I see as the positive side of the current crisis. I think that it has raised awareness. There were a lot of issues that for a lot of people were invisible. And you've just referred to the essential workers, and not just the medical workers, but, you know, the people who clean office buildings, the people who come and stand at the cash register, the people who load the groceries, all those people, we took them for granted. And when something came up in the form of a bill that said, you know, we have to do more for those people, the attitude was, we don't really have to do more. I think that people now are more aware of the extent to which our society and every one of us depends on a lot of people that have been sort of ignored in many different ways. So it's the time to act on that. Yeah,
it really is.
Thank you.
Okay. I've got another question for you. This one is also from Facebook, from Aaron Osofsky. He wants to know whether you agree that burning biomass for energy is even worse due to its toxic emissions and loss of carbon sequestration potential. So biomass would include, for instance, I believe, wood pellets, burning that for fuel.
When I first moved to New Hampshire about 10 years ago, I was stunned by the importance of biomass up here, and I was told it was essential to our getting the RPS. It was essential to our renewable energy initiatives that we were able to work with the industry and make sure that those jobs were protected. I think that's an argument that's 10 years out of date. We now have medical knowledge. We have scientific understanding of what's happening with particulate matter, burning, combustion. We have to stop it at every point. And I know that many people take a different stance on this, and I myself have not always been in this position, but I have been moved to a grasping that essential, that we can't combust our way into a better future. We need to keep our trees as carbon sequestration reserves. We need to particularly to keep the large trees. Little trees that we plant there's nothing like the benefit that we get from the existing forests.
It's very interesting because this issue is such an example of how the thinking about renewables, about what's green, evolved over time. 10 years ago or earlier than that, there was that vision that it was good to burn wood. It was good because it was a local resource. Therefore, you didn't have to import it from anywhere. It was not like oil. It was good because it provided local jobs. And it was good because it was renewable, because trees keep growing. So there was a whole narrative that was very persuasive, even for nature lovers. And it's taken a while to, after looking at what's happening in places like Keene, well, all of a sudden they have huge air problems, not because they were burning oil, but because they were burning wood, and there was the particular problem. So it's an example. It's an example of how those things evolve over time. We learn more over time, and we make different choices. And the choices that we should make today are very different from the choices a lot of us made 10 years ago. We decided, well, pellets are really clean. I mean, it's local, it's clean, it's renewable. Let's do it. So there's been a big change there. Yeah.
But we need to be cognizant that, yes, we're lucky we don't have coal mines here, and we don't have to worry about transitioning coal workers and communities that are dependent on that resource. But we do have communities that are highly dependent on the biomass industry. And we need to be providing job training opportunities. We need to be getting them into apprenticeship programs, because there are lots and lots of jobs in local renewable energy that would be outdoors, that would be working with nature. All the things that people are telling me are so great about the biomass industry, those are all available with other renewables, green renewables. The particulate matter, we know so much more about the damage to the lungs, to the heart. It's not something that we can continue to rely on.
That's right. But then that brings up another issue that has nothing to do with energy, but it's the issue of retraining and retraining programs. Because one thing that has to be clear is that it is, the state's responsibility to create a safety net for people who find themselves displaced from one area of business, and to provide training programs, and to provide, alternate jobs, so that they can relocate and they can continue to be productive and to have, a decent income and a decent job and a fulfilling everyday life, even if it turns out that the tide turns against the particular field in which they were working, as is now the case with the biomass industry. Yeah.
And there are going to be jobs in the forest. I mean, we have to make sure that all that brush doesn't accumulate, and then we get into a situation where we could have wildfires. We want to make sure that our forests stay clearer so that the trails are available for recreational use, whether that's in the winter for snowmobiles or it's the summertime for hikers. There are a lot of jobs still to be had in the forestry area, but we have to find new ways of financing that. And as you say, this is an area where it requires state policy, requires long-term thinking about what is the benefit to all of us. We are reliant on that, our natural resources for so much of our economy. And therefore, it's incumbent upon us to be investing in them and providing that livelihood for the workers who do the necessary work.
Yeah, because, community action is extremely important. And there has to be that communication from communities to the legislature. But policy is made in the legislature. And that's our responsibility as legislators. And that's the responsibility of the state as an enactor of policies that help out in those transitions, whether those transitions are the transition from biomass to a different set of jobs, or whether the transition from the pre-COVID economy to the post-COVID economy. That's where those decisions are made, and they have to be implemented in the communities.
You're sure right.
Yeah.
Got another one, Matt?
Katerina, do you want to take the next one?
Sure, absolutely. The next one comes to us from YouTube, and it's, have you had any success bringing Republicans over to support renewable energy policies?
Well, let me speak first, because I had an easier time than Lee did. When I was in science, technology, and energy, that was one of the least partisan committees in the House. And in fact, I had Republican supporters for the PACE legislation. Not a lot, but I had some. And the same thing can be said for broadband. It is my understanding, and I now will let Lee speak to the point, that things have become more polarized in the House now, and that it's harder to get Republicans on board with any of those initiatives.
You really don't want to get me started on this one. We have a very ideologically polarized committee to the point where we have climate deniers. We have people who are basically on the payroll of the fossil fuel industries that are pushing a particular agenda. And the notion of supporting a renewable energy policy is very, very difficult for them. So that we've had, over the 6 years that I've been there, you could watch every year fewer and fewer bipartisan votes. And on my energy storage bill, which again the governor signed, not one Republican sponsor. And he vetoed bills that were Republican sponsored, that were bipartisan supported, and so it's hard to figure why certain things happen. I have to say my bill was not really controversial. Energy storage is so obviously a force multiplier for renewable energy, and it was providing an opportunity for the PUC to weigh in and have an investigative docket and find out the actual scientific rigor here. So yes, but it didn't help on the committee. It did not sail through the committee, neither in the House nor the Senate. So it's very important that we have Democrats elected and that we have a blue wave this fall, because we have only a few years to address the climate crisis.
No.
We have to be taking action. We can't be stalled, these constant vetoes and this bickering. We need action, and to have action, we have to have majorities that can make it happen.
I mean, we had a much easier time in terms of the governor, because we first had John Lynch and then we had Maggie Hassan. Yeah. But it is true that it was not as polarized. I mean, I worked on a number of bills with Senator Odell, and he was a Republican. And we worked together on a bill for Claremont, and it was a bill to create that would enable Claremont to create a hot water heating district. And that would have brought the cost of electricity way down for a downtown area, and therefore it would have made it much more attractive for investors, businesses, and better for residents. that was a Republican senator. And we worked on this one and we worked on another bill together. So that was not that unusual. I think that's become much more difficult.
People don't realize that Citizens United even permeates to the halls of New Hampshire, so that we have dark money. We have people who are being told how to vote, that they won't get their campaign contributions if they don't vote the way that the fossil fuel industry wants them to. I mean, fossil fuel industry knows very well that its head is on the chopping block, and they know that they have a limited time in which to make their money. It's the most profitable industry that has ever existed in the history of the world.
I know.
And they have enormous money and enormous political clout. And the only way we can fight back is through grassroots community organizing, voting, getting out there and getting people who are not in the pockets of the fossil fuel industry elected.
That's right. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank
Well,
you.
do we have time for one more question, would you say? Yeah. We could do one more. Let's see. This question is from YouTube. This might be somewhat related to our last question. What are the biggest challenges to bringing more renewable energy to New Hampshire?
Yeah, somewhat. Beatriz, you're going to have to take this one.
Well, I mean, we already talked about the governor. And so let's start from the top down, shall we? We talked about the governor. I mean, a governor who vetoes or just about, with the exception of storage, every initiative that comes to his desk, regardless who sponsors it, that's a real problem. Because just getting those bills through the House and the Senate requires a tremendous amount of work. It requires reaching out to the communities, figuring out what their needs are, finding advocates, having people to testify, drafting the bills, you're making the floor speeches, making alliances with everybody, and then getting it through the House and then getting it through the Senate. And when you have a tremendous success, because there is no way to call it something else, like the success we had this year in the House and the Senate, pushing so many really progressive energy-related bills, and then to see them die on the desk of the governor, well, that tells you who the greatest obstacle is at this point, without any question. Because as we pointed out earlier, the tools are there, not all the tools, but there are quite a few tools there. We just need to be allowed to use them. And that's exactly what has not happened this time.
Republican governors in Vermont and Massachusetts have done great things on renewable energy. There's no requirement of partisanship to say that all of these efforts have to be killed.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think we're out of time for the questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Well, thank you so much.
Beatriz.
Thank you. Good to see you, Lee. Thank you for coming too. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, Katerina and Matthew.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great job.